Then to you,
Let's
Michelle.
assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's
a good
fine.
assumption. That's
yeah,
a good
well, that's
assumption.
what you would say. So, so let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
Let's get precise about this, okay?
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it?
Who you talking about? Jordan Peterson, trending #1 on Twitter? Jordan Peterson with an international bestseller? I want him to tweet something out about me in my book. Jordan Peterson, right? This is what I'm saying to you. Why the rage, bruh? You're doing well, but you're a mean, mad white man, and you're gonna get us.
What's up, YouTube? Hope you guys are feeling good. Today, guys, we're back here into a new video. Today, we're going to be checking out mock debates on political correctness. Okay, this is going to be amazing to watch. I love to check this video out with you guys. This is by Jordan Peterson, Dr. Fries, and two other people. But this is an amazing debate, and I would love you guys to check this out with me. Let's see how it goes. Let's get right to it, guys.
We had our resolution tonight. On the way in, we had this audience of roughly 3,000 people here in downtown Toronto vote on, be it resolved, what you call political correctness, I call progress. Let's see the agree, disagree on that number. 36% agree, 64% disagree. So, a room in play. Now, we asked you, how many of you were open to changing your vote over the course of the debate? Are you fixed, agree, disagree, or could you potentially be convinced by one or other of these two teams to move your vote over the next hour and a half? Let's see those numbers now.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, a pretty open-minded crowd. This debate is very much in play. And as per the agreed-upon order of speakers, I'm going to call on Michelle Goldberg first. Michelle, would you like a sip of water? You can have a sip of water before you start. Call on Michelle Goldberg first for her 6 minutes of opening remarks. Michelle.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. As Rudyard knows, I initially balked a little bit at the resolution that we're debating because there are a lot of things that fall under the rubric of political correctness that I don't call progress. I don't like no platforming or Twitter or trigger warnings. You know, like a lot of middle-aged liberals, there are many aspects of student social justice culture that I find off-putting. Although I'm not sure that that particular generation gap is anything new. On the record about the toxicity of social media call-out culture, and I think it's good to debate people whose ideas I don't like, which is why I'm here. So if there are social justice warriors in the audience, I feel like I should apologize to you because I'm probably not, you're probably going to feel like I'm not adequately defending your ideas. But the reason I'm on this side of the stage is that political correctness isn't just a term for left-wing excesses on college campuses or people being terrible on Twitter. Especially as deployed by Mr. Peterson, I think it can be a way to delegitimize any attempt for women and racial and sexual minorities to overcome discrimination, or even to argue that such discrimination is real. In the New York Times today, Mr. Peterson says, quote, "The people who hold that our culture is an oppressive patriarchy, they don't want to admit that the current hierarchy might be predicated on competence." Now, that sounds particularly insane to me because I'm an American and our president is Donald Trump. But, but it's an assumption that I think underlies a worldview in which any challenges to the current hierarchy are written off as political correctness. I also think we should be clear that this isn't really a debate about free speech. Mr. Peterson once referred to what he called, quote, "the evil trinity of equity, diversity, and inclusivity," and said those three words, if you hear people mouth those three words, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, you know who you're dealing with and you should step away from that because it is not acceptable. He argues that the movie Frozen is politically correct propaganda, and at one point he floated the idea of creating a database of university course content so students could avoid postmodern critical theory. So in the criticism of political correctness, I sometimes hear an urge or an attempt to purge our thought of certain analytical categories that mirrors, I think, the worst caricatures of the social justice left that want to get rid of anything that smacks of colonialism or patriarchy or white supremacy.
So we should first decide what we're talking about. We're not talking about my views of political correctness, despite what you might have inferred from the last speaker's comments. This is how it looks to me. We essentially need something approximating a low-resolution grand narrative to unite us. And we need a narrative to unite us because otherwise we don't have peace. What's playing out in the universities and in broader society right now is a debate between two fundamental low-resolution narratives, neither of which can be completely accurate because they can't encompass all the details. Obviously, human beings have an individual element and a collective element, a group element, let's say. The question is, what story should be paramount? And this is how it looks to me. In the West, we have reasonably functional, reasonably free, remarkably productive, stable hierarchies that are open to consideration of the dispossessed that hierarchies generally create. Our societies are freer and functioning more effectively than any societies anywhere else in the world and than any societies ever have. And as far as I'm concerned, and I think there's good reason to assume this, it's because the fundamental low-resolution grand narrative that we've oriented ourselves around in the West is one of the sovereignty of the individual, and it's predicated on the idea that all things considered, the best way for me to interact with someone else is individual to individual, and to react to that person as if they're both part of the process, because that's the right way of thinking about it, the psychological process by which things we don't understand can yet be explored, and by things that aren't properly organized in our society can be yet set right. The reason we're valuable as individuals, both with regards to our rights and responsibilities, is because that's our essential purpose, and that's our nobility, and that's our function. What's happening, as far as I'm concerned, in the universities in particular, and spreading very rapidly out into the broader world, including the corporate world, much to what should be its chagrin, is a collectivist narrative. And of course, there's some utility in a collectivist narrative because we're all part of groups in different ways. But the collectivist narrative that I regard as politically correct is a strange pastiche of postmodernism and neo-Marxism. And its fundamental claim is that, no, you're not essentially an individual. You're essentially a member of a group. And that group might be your ethnicity, and it might be your sex, and it might be your race, and it might be any of the endless numbers of other potential groups that you belong to, because you belong to many of them. And that you should be essentially categorized along with those who are like you on that dimension in that group. That's proposition number one. Proposition number two is that the proper way to view the world is as a battleground between groups of different power. So you define the groups first, and then you assume that you view the individual from the group context, you view the battle between groups from the group context, and you view history itself as a consequence of nothing but the power maneuvers between different groups. That eliminates any consideration of the individual at a very fundamental level, and also any idea, for example, of free speech, because if you're collectivist at heart in this manner, there is no such thing as free speech. It isn't that it's debated by those on the radical left and let's say the rest of us, so to speak. It's that in that formulation, there's no such thing as free speech, because for an individualist, free speech is how you make sense of the world and reorganize society in a proper manner. But for the radical left type collectivist that's associated with this viewpoint of political correctness, when you speak, all you're doing is playing a power game on behalf of your group. And there's nothing else that you can do, because that's all there is.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stand here at the podium. I'm a preacher. And I will ask for an offering at the end of my presentation. This is the swimsuit competition of the intellectual beauty pageant. So let me show you the curves of my thought. Oh my God, was that a politically incorrect statement I just made? How did we get to the point where the hijacking of the discourse on political correctness has become a kind of Manichaean distinction between us and them? The abortive fantasy just presented is remarkable for both its clarity and yet the muddiness of the context from which it has emerged. What's interesting to me is that when we look at the radical left, I'm saying, where they at? I want to join them. They ain't running nothing. I'm from a country where a man stands up every day to tweet the moral mendacity of his viciousness into a nation he has turned into his psychic commode. Y'all got Justin, we got Donald.
Oh, wow.
So what's interesting then is that political correctness has transmogrified into a caricature of the left. The left came up with the term political correctness, shall I remind you. We were tired of our excuses and our excesses and our exaggerations. We were willing to be self-critical in a way that I fear my confrères, my compatriots, are not. Don't take yourself too seriously. Smile. Take yourself not seriously at all, but what you do with deadly seriousness. Now it is transmogrified into an attempt to characterize the radical left. The radical left is a metaphor, it's a symbol, it's an articulation. They don't exist, their numbers are too small. I'm on college campuses, I don't see much of them coming. When I hear about identity politics, it amazes me. The collectivist identity politics, last time I checked, white folk invented race. That was an invention from a dominant culture that wanted groups to, at their behest. The invention of race was driven by the demand of a dominant culture to subordinate others. Right? Patriarchy was the demand of men to have their exclusive vision presented. The beauty of feminism is it's not going to resolve differences between men and women. It just says men don't automatically get the last word. Of course, in my crib, they never did. And so identity politics has been generated as a bête noire of the right, and yet the right doesn't understand the degree to which identity has been foisted upon black people and brown people and people of color from the very beginning on women and trans people. You think that I want to be part of a group that is constantly abhorred by people at Starbucks? I'm minding my own black business. Walking down the street, I have group identity thrust upon me. They don't say, ah, ha, ha. There goes a Negro. Highly intelligent, articulate, verbose, capable of rhetorical fury at the drop of a hat. We should not interrogate him as to the bona fides of his legal status. No, they treat me as part of a group. And the problem is that our friends don't want to acknowledge is that the hegemony, the dominance of that group has been so vicious that it has denied us the opportunity to exist as individuals. Individualism is the characteristic moment in modernity. Mr. Peterson is right. The development of the individual, however, is predicated upon notions of intelligence. Immanuel Kant and David Hume and others, philosophically, Descartes comes along, introducing knowledge into the phrase, saying that knowledge is based upon a kind of reference to the golden intelligence, the reflective glass that one possesses, and yet it got rooted in the very ground of our existence. So knowledge has fleshly basis, and what I'm saying to you, the knowledge that I bring as a person of color makes a difference in my body because I know what people think of me and I know how they respond to me, and that ain't no theory. Am I mad at trigger warnings? The only trigger warning I want is from a cop. Are you about to shoot me?
Did they come again?
Not funny. In America, where young black people die repeatedly, unarmed, without provocation. And so for me, identity politics is something very serious. And what's interesting about safe spaces, I hear about the university. I teach there. Look, if you're in a safe space in your body, you don't need a safe space. Some of that is overblown. Some of it is ridiculous. I understand. I believe that the classroom is a robust place for serious learning. I believe in the interrogation of knowledge based upon our understanding mutually of the edifying proposition of enlightenment. At the same time, some people ain't as equal as others. So we have to understand the conditions under which they have emerged and in which they have been benighted and attacked by their own culture. And I ain't seen nobody be a bigger snowflake than white men who complain. Mommy, they won't let us play and have everything we used to have under the old regime where we were right racists and supremacists and dominant and patriarchs and hated gays and lesbians and transsexuals that, yeah, you got to share. This ain't your world, this everybody's world.
I'm standing next to someone with whom I have, differences, shall we say, in terms of politics and all kinds of other things, precisely because I think all this has got to stop. This rage, resentment, hostility, intolerance, above all this with us or against us, certainty. A Grand Canyon has opened up in our world. The fissure, the crack, grows wider every day. Neither on each side can hear a word that the other shrieks, and nor do they want to. While these armies and propagandists in the culture wars clash, down below in the enormous space between the two sides, the people of the world try to get on with their lives, alternately baffled, bored, and betrayed by the horrible noises and explosions that echo all around. I think it's time for this toxic, binary, zero-sum madness to stop before we destroy ourselves. All my adult life, I have been what you might call a lefty, a soft lefty, a liberal of the most hand-wringing, milksop, milquetoast variety. Not a burning man the barricade socialist, not even really a progressive worth the name. I've been on marches, but I've never quite dared wave placards or banners. Am I a loathed member of that band, an SJW, a social justice warrior? I don't think highly of social injustice, I have to say, but I character myself mostly as a social justice warrior. My intellectual heroes growing up were Bertrand Russell and G.E. Moore, liberal thinkers, people like that, writers like E.M. Forster. I believed, and I think I still do believe, in the sanctity of human relations, of the primacy of the heart and friendship and love and common interest. These are more personal, interior beliefs than they are political exterior convictions, more a humanistic version of a religious impulse, I suppose. I trust in humanity. I believe in humanity. I think I do, despite all that has happened in the 40 years of my adulthood. I am soft, and I can easily be swept away by harder hearts and harder intellects. I'm sometimes surprised to be described as an activist, but over time I have energetically involved myself with what you might call causes. I grew up knowing that I was gay. Well, in fact, from the very first I knew I was gay. I remember when I was born looking up and saying, that's the last time I'm going up one of those. I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish, so I have a natural, obviously, horror of racism. I want racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, bullying, bigotry, intolerance of all humankind to end. That's surely a given amongst all of us. The question is how such a golden aim is to be achieved. My ultimate objection to political correctness is not that it combines so much of what I have spent a lifetime loathing and opposing, preachiness, with great respect, piety, self-righteousness, heresy hunting, denunciation, shaming, assertion without evidence, accusation, inquisition, censoring. That's not why I'm incurring the wrath of my fellow liberals by standing on this side of the House. My real objection is that I don't think political correctness works. I want to get to the Golden Hill, but I don't think that's the way to get there. I believe one of the greatest human failings is to prefer to be right than to be effective. And political correctness is always obsessed with how right it is without thinking of how effective it might be. I wouldn't class myself as a classical libertarian, but I do relish transgression, and I deeply and instinctively distrust conformity and orthodoxy. Progress is not achieved by preachers and guardians of morality, but, to paraphrase Yevgeny Zemyatin, by madmen, hermits, heretics, dreamers, rebels, and skeptics.
We're now going to go into a round of rebuttals to allow each of our presenters 3 minutes to reflect on what they've heard and to make some additional points. We're going to do that in the same order that we had the opening statements. So, Michelle, you're up first.
You know, a lot of the things that Stephen Fry said, and particularly his temperament, were probably in agreement, but this inquisition, this censoriousness, on the one hand, I'm I see where he's coming from, but I think it's a little bit virtual, right? I mean, who's really censoring you? I understand what it feels like to feel censored. I understand what it feels like to be on the wrong side of a Twitter mob or get a lot of nasty comments. And that's a bad feeling, you know, and it's a counterproductive tactic, but that's not censorship.
Well, I guess I would like to set out a challenge in somewhat the same format as Mr. Fry did to people on the moderate left. I mean, I've studied totalitarianism for a very long time, both on the left and on the right in various forms. And I think we've done a pretty decent job of determining when right-wing beliefs become dangerous. I think that they become dangerous when the people who stand on the right evoke notions of racial superiority or ethnic superiority, something like that. It's fairly easy to draw a box around them and place them to one side and necessary, and I think we've done a pretty good job of that. What I fail to see happening on the left, and this is with regards to the sensible left, because such a thing exists, is for the same thing to happen with regards to the radical leftists. Okay, so here's an open question. If it's not diversity, inclusivity, and equity as a triumvirate that mark out the too excessive left, and with equity defined, by the way, not as equality of opportunity, which is an absolutely laudable goal, but as equality of outcome, which is how it's defined, then exactly how do we demarcate the too extreme left? And so it's perfectly okay for someone to criticize my attempts to identify something like a boundary. We could say diversity, inclusivity, and equity, especially equity, which is in fact equality of outcome, which is an absolutely abhorrent notion. If you know anything about history, you know that. And I'm perfectly willing to hear some reasonable alternatives, but what I hear continually from people on the left, first of all, as my opponents did, to construe every argument that is possibly able to be construed on the axis of group identification, and to fail to help the rest of us differentiate the reasonable left, which stands for the oppressed, necessarily, from the pathological left that's capable of unbelievable destruction. And what I see happening in the university campuses in particular, where the leftists absolutely predominate, and that's certainly not my imagination, that's well documented by perfectly reasonable people like Jonathan Haidt, is an absolute failure to make precisely that distinction. And I see the same thing echoed tonight.
And here we are deriving our sense of identity from the very culture that we ignore. Look at the indigenous names and the First Nation names: Toronto, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, Tim Hortons. But I'll tell you, there's an envy of the kind of freedom and liberty that people of color and other minorities bring because we bring the depth of knowledge in our body. There's a kind of jealousy of that. As the greatest living Canadian philosopher, Aubrey Drake Graham, says, jealousy is just love and hate at the same time. And so for me, I think it's necessary. I agree with Mr. Fry. We shouldn't be nasty and combative. And yet, I don't see nastiness and combativeness from people. I see them making a desire to have their individual identities respected. When I get shot down for no other reason than I'm black, when I get categorized for no other reason than my color, I am living in a culture that refuses to see me as a great individual.
It's interesting to hear that there really doesn't seem to be a problem, but yet I think we all instinctively know that there is some kind of a problem. There isn't censorship. Of course not in the way that there is in Russia. I've been to Russia. I faced off with a deeply homophobic and unpleasant man, and there's political correctness in Russia. It's just political correctness on the right. And that's what I grew up with, political correctness, which meant that you couldn't say certain things on television. You couldn't say fuck, for example, on television, because it was incorrect to do so. And as always, the same reason was that someone would appear and say, I'm not shocked. Oh, of course, no, I'm not shocked. I'm not offended. I'm offended on behalf of others, young, impressionable, plastic minds, the vulnerable. And that's not good enough. It's so often people are saying, you see, I don't mind being called a faggot or a kike or whatever, or a mad person, because I've got mental health issues. I don't mind people insulting me. And people say, well, that's all right for you, Stephen, because you know you're strong. Well, I don't feel particularly strong, and I don't know that I like being called a faggot and a kike particularly, but I don't believe that the advances in my culture that have allowed me to marry, as I have now been for 3 years, to someone of my gender, I don't believe they are a result of political correctness. And maybe political correctness is actually just some sort of live trout, that the harder we squeeze it, the further it goes away. And you will be saying, I'm not talking about political correctness, you're talking about social justice, with which I agree, with whether you want to call it identity politics or the history of your people, the history of my people. My people were slaves as well. Both the British were slaves of Romans and the Jews were slaves of the Egyptians. All human beings have been slaves at some point, and we all, in that sense, share that knowledge of how important it is to speak up. But Russell Means, who was a friend of mine towards the end, who founded the American Indian movement, he said, oh, for God's sake, call me an Indian or a Lakota Sioux or Russell. I don't care what you call me. It's how we're treated that matters. And so I'm really addressing a more popular idea.
Stephen Fry is
also, actually, in Barrow, Alaska, an Inupiat said, call me an Eskimo. It's obviously easier for you because you keep mispronouncing Inupiat. You know, words do matter. I'll just end with a quick story. Gay rights came about in England because we slowly and persistently knocked on the door of people in power. We didn't shout, we didn't scream. People like Ian McKellen eventually got to see the Prime Minister. And when the Queen signed in the royal assent, as she has to, for the bill allowing equality of marriage, she said, Lord, you know, I couldn't imagine this in 1953. Really is extraordinary, isn't it? Just wonderful. And handed it over. Now, it's a nice story, and I hope it's true, but it's nothing to do with political correctness. It's to do with human decency. It's that simple.
Let's start with you. Why isn't there just harm that's done to groups by privileging their group identity, whether it be a group identity of race or of gender, and not immediately treating them as individuals in the way that Jordan and Stephen would like to see them first?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there was no arbitrary and random distinction that people of color and other minority groups made. When I talked about the invention of race, the invention of gender, the invention of groupthink, that was not done by those groups that have been so named, as Ms. Goldberg said. So first of all, you've got to acknowledge the historical evolution of that reality, and the concept of group identity did not begin with them. It began with a group that didn't have to announce its identity. When you are in control, you don't have to announce who you are. So that many white brothers and sisters don't see themselves as one among many other ethnicities or groups. What they see themselves as, I'm just American, I'm Canadian. Can't you be like us? Can't you transcend those narrow group identifications? And yet, those group identifications have been imprinted upon them by the very people who now, because their group power has been challenged. Let's make no mistake about it. There's a challenge. I agree with Mr. Fry in a kind of Netherland of how sweet it would be to have a kingly and queenly metaphor about how it got resolved. That ain't the real deal, homie. And in the real world, in the real world, there's stuff at stake. What's at stake are bodies. What's at stake are people's lives. What's at stake? People are still being lynched, killed. What's at stake? People, because of their sexuality and their racial identity, are still being harmed. So I'm suggesting to you, it's not that we are against being treated as individuals. That's what we're crying for. Please don't see me as a member of a group that you think is a thug, a nigger, a nihilist, a pathological person. See me as an individual who embodies the realities of who we are. But I'll end by saying this. What Michelle said is extremely important. The people who have individual rights did not have to fight for them in the same manner that people of color and others have had to. When Mr. Fry talked about enslavement, he named them. Read Orlando Patterson's comparative history of race and slavery over 28 civilizations. The Greeks did not have the same kind of slavery that Americans did. It was chattel slavery.
So explain the victim.
Well, I think it's one of the primal sins of identity politics players on the left and the right, just to be clear about that. Personally, since this has got personal at times, I'm no fan of the identitarian right. I think that anybody who plays a game, a conceptual game where group identity comes first and foremost, risks an exacerbation of tribalism. It doesn't matter whether it's on the left or the right. With regards to the idea of group rights, well, there's a fundamental, and this is something we've fallen into terribly in Canada, not least because we had to contend with the threat of Quebec separatism, but the idea of group rights is extraordinarily problematic because the the obverse of the coin of individual rights is individual responsibilities. And you can hold an individual responsible, and an individual can be responsible. And so that's partly why individuals have rights. But groups, how do you hold a group responsible? I mean, the whole idea is it's not a good idea to hold a group responsible. First of all, it flies in the face of the idea of the sort of justice systems that we've laid out in the West that are essentially predicated first on the assumption of individual innocence, but also on the possibility of individual guilt, not group guilt. We saw what happened in the 20th century many, many times when the idea of group guilt was enabled to get a foothold, let's say, in the polity and in the justice system. It was absolutely catastrophic. And so, okay, fine, group rights. Well, how are you going to contend with the alternative to that, the opposite of that? Or where's the group responsibility? And how are you going to hold your groups responsible? Well, we don't have to talk about that because we're too concerned with rectifying historical injustices, hypothetical and otherwise. And that's certainly not to say that there weren't any shortage of absolutely catastrophic historical injustices. That's not the point. The point is how you view the situation at the most fundamental level. And group rights are an absolute catastrophe, in my opinion.
I'm not sure that we necessarily have to analogize from the opposite of individual rights is individual responsibility. I'm not sure that that analogy necessarily holds for the groups. I mean, in the United States, and one of the things that I think is complicated about this discussion is that we're talking about three very different cultural contexts, three different histories, three different kind of legal regimes. But in the United States, a huge part of our politics has been groups struggling for rights for their individual members, right? I mean, so women in the United States, seeking the right to reproductive control of their body. African Americans in the United States seeking redress from police brutality or discrimination or simply the kind of tendency in America of white people to call the police whenever they see an African American in a place where they don't think that they're supposed to be. And I don't see how you can contend with any of those social problems if you see society as just an ocean of atomized individuals. And I don't think there's anything pernicious about people banding together on the basis of their common identity to seek redress for discrimination and exclusion. I mean, I think that is everything that's best about our democracy.
I'm still very lost about why we aren't talking about political correctness. We're talking about politics,
Thank
and that's fine.
I'm trying to say that. Thank you.
And I share exactly what you think about it. I'm not an enemy of identity politics per se. I can obviously see where it goes wrong and where it's annoying. Let's be empirical about this. How well is it working for you in America at the moment? Well, not well at all. Really isn't.
Right.
You can answer me in a moment. The reason that Trump and Brexit in Britain and all kinds of nativists all over Europe are succeeding is not the triumph of the right, it's the catastrophic failure of the left. It's our fault. We absolutely... My point is not that I've turned to the right or anything like that, or that I'm nice and fluffy and want everybody to be decent. I'm saying, fuck political correctness. Resist. Fight. If you have a point of view, fight it in the proper manner, using democracy as it should be, not channels of education, not language. It's so silly. There's a chess rule, In chess, the best move to play in chess is not the best chess move, it's the move your opponent least wants you to play. At the moment, you're being recruiting sergeants for the right. By annoying and upsetting, and instead of either fighting or persuading. But political correctness is a middle course that simply doesn't work.
Well, first of all, you said be empirical. Now, empirical, as far as I know, the word means that which can be verified or falsified through the census.
Exactly.
So if we look at it in an objective way, the reality is that people don't have equal access to the means to articulate the very moment you're talking about.
I'm talking about the empirical results of this political attitude.
I understand that, but my point is simply this.
He does not
I'm
understand
suggesting to you that people use the weapons at hand. Now, it was Abraham Joshua Heschel, the rabbi, who said, everybody's not guilty, but everybody's responsible. Right? That's a distinction there. Everybody clearly is not guilty. But what's interesting, look at the flip side. If you have benefited from 300 years of holding people in servitude, thinking that you did it all on your own. Why can't these people work harder? Let me see, for 300 years, you ain't had no job.
Play the victim game
So
again.
the reality is, for 300 years, you hold people in the bands. You hold them in subordination. You refuse to give them rights. Then all of a sudden, you free them and say you're now individuals. Not having the skills, not having the skills. I'm talking about America, first of all. I'm talking about American society, first of all. I'm talking about the Northern Hemisphere. I'm talking about every society where enslavement has existed, but I'm speaking specifically of the repudiation of individual rights among people of color in America who were denied the opportunity to be individuals. So I obviously and ideally, and I think Michelle Goldberg does too, agree with the emphasis on individuals. What we're saying to you is that we have not been permitted to be individuals. We have not been permitted to exercise our individual autonomy and authority, and the refusal to do so, to recognize me as an individual, means when you roll up on me and I'm a 12-year-old boy in a park and you shoot first in ways you do to black kids that you don't do to white kids, you are not treating that person as an individual. If we're living in a society where women are subject to aberrant forms of horrid, patriarchal, sexist, and misogynist behavior, you are not acknowledging the centrality of the individuality of women. You are treating them according to a group dynamic. And if we get beyond the ability of people on the right to understand the degree to which they have operated from the basis of benefit from group identity, without having said, I'll end by saying this. The great American philosopher Beyonce Knowles said that it has been said that racism is so American that if you challenge racism, you look like you're challenging America. We are challenging inequality. We are challenging the refusal to see me as an individual. When we overcome that, have at it, we're all on equal plane.
I think it's fine. I think it's good.
The pot is getting stirred here.
So I've got a couple of questions.
So let's your side spoke, so I'm going to go to Jordan, then to you,
Let's
Michelle.
assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's
a good
fine.
assumption.
That's what you would say. So, so let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
Let's get precise about this, okay?
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it? Now, let's get precise about one other thing, okay? We'll get precise about one other thing.
Precise?
Yeah, precise, yes. And so,
you see what you see what Eric is doing.
If we can agree, and we haven't, that the left can go too far, which it clearly can, then how would my worthy opponents precisely define when the left that they stand for has gone too far? You didn't like equity, equality of outcome. I think that's a great marker. But if you have a better suggestion and won't sidestep the question, so let's figure out how I can dispense with my white privilege, and so that you can tell me when the left has gone too far, since they clearly can. And that's what this debate is about political correctness. It's about the left going too far. And I think it's gone too far in many ways. And I'd like to figure out exactly how and when, so the reasonable left could make its ascendance again and we could quit all this nonsense.
Okay, Michelle, go ahead.
Perfect question. Very good.
Do you mind if I answer, Stephen? I will answer you, but I just want to answer Stephen Fry first, because you talked about, this is how we got Trump, and this is the failure of the left. And so I'm a journalist. I went to a ton of Trump rallies during the campaign in different parts of the country, and you're right. Everywhere I went, I heard complaints about political correctness. Far more than I heard complaints about, say, NAFTA. But when you asked people what they meant by political correctness, they called a woman they worked with girl, and she got mad at them. And they could, you couldn't in public wonder aloud whether the president of the United States was really a Muslim. They didn't like that they couldn't make gay jokes anymore. And so on the one hand, you're right, and I've written about this. I think that when you try to, that when people have these prejudices and you try to suppress them, it can create a kind of dangerous counter-reaction. But I also think that, what they were reacting to, again, to go back to the title of this debate, what they called political correctness, the fact that they had to have this urbane black president who they felt talked down to them, which is really what they meant. I don't see a way around that, because that is, like I said, that's progress. So to go to the question of when the left goes too far, to me it's pretty easy, violence and censorship.
Mike, I want to come to you on those, great, Michelle, on Jordan's point about how does he, in a sense, get an equal voice in this debate back if it is implied that his participation brings with it this baggage of white privilege that doesn't allow him to see clearly the issues that are before us.
But that is to be complicit in the very problem itself, terminologically. You're beginning at a point that's already productive and controversial. You're saying, how can he get his equality back? Who are you talking about? Jordan Peterson, trending #1 on Twitter? Jordan Peterson, with an international bestseller? I want him to tweet something out about me in my book. Jordan Peterson, right? This is what I'm saying to you. Why the rage, bruh? You're doing well, but you're a mean, mad white man. And you're going to get us right. And
this is a racist statement. Why do you...
I have never seen so much wine and snowflaking. There's enough wine in here to start a vineyard. And what I'm saying to you empirically and precisely, when you ask the question about white privilege, the fact that you ask it in the way you did, dismissive, pseudoscientific, non-empirical, and without justification, the truth is that white privilege doesn't act according to quantifiable segments. It's about the degree to which we are willing as a society to grapple with the ideals of freedom, justice, and equality upon which it's based. Number two, what's interesting to me, you're talking about not having a collective identity. What do you call a nation? Are you Canadian? Are you Canadian by yourself? Are you an individual, or are you part of a group? When America formed its union, it did so in opposition to another group. So the reality is that those who are part of group identities in politics deny the legitimacy and validity of those groups and the fact that they have been created thusly, and then have resentment against others. All I'm asking for is the opportunity. The quotation you talk about, the difference between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity, that's a staid and retried argument, hackneyed phrase derived from the halcyon days of the debate over affirmative action. Are you looking for outcomes that can be determined equally, or are you looking for opportunity? If you free a person after a whole long time of oppression and say now you are free to survive, if you have no skills, if you have no quantifiable means of existence, what you have done is liberated them into oppression. And all I'm suggesting to you, Lyndon Baines Johnson, one of our great presidents, said, if you start a man in a race 100 years behind, it is awfully difficult to catch up. So I don't think Jordan Peterson is suffering from anything except an exaggerated sense of entitlement and resentment, and his own privilege is invisible to him, and it's manifest with lethal intensity and ferocity right here on stage.
Jordan, I'm going to have to let you respond to that if you wish.
Well, what I derive from that series of rebuttals, let's say, is twofold. The first is that saying that the radical left goes too far when they engage in violence is not a sufficient response by any stretch of the imagination, because there are sets of ideas in radical leftist thinking that led to the catastrophes of the 20th century, and that was at the level of idea, not at the level of violent action. It's a very straightforward thing to say you're against violence. It's like being against poverty. It's like, generically speaking, decent people are against poverty and violence. It doesn't address the issue in the least. And with regards to my privilege or lack thereof, I'm not making the case that I haven't had advantages in my life and disadvantages in my life like most people. You don't know anything about my background or where I came from, and it doesn't matter to you because fundamentally I'm a mean white man. That's a hell of a thing to say in a debate.
the mean, mad, white comment was not predicated upon my historical excavation of your past. It's based upon the evident vitriol with which you speak and the denial of a sense of equanimity among combatants in an argument. So I'm saying again, you're a mean, mad, white man, and the viciousness is evident.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Well, I think I'm going to point out two things again. The first is that my question about when the left goes too far still hasn't been answered. And then the second thing I'm going to point out is that, you know, it's conceivable that I am a mean man. You know, I mean, maybe I'm meaner than some people and not as mean as others. I think that's probably more the case. But I would say the fact that race got dragged into that particular comment is a better exemplar of what the hell I think is wrong with the politically correct left than anything else that could have possibly happened.
That was funny. Imagine the hurt, the anxiety, the insult that you might genuinely feel, according to what I felt was an appropriate comment of description at the moment of its expression. But imagine now those hurt feelings and
Not hurt.
Okay, you feel great. You feel great about it.
That's really different. I'm not a victim. I'm not hurt. I'm
You're
appalled.
not hurt. Okay, you wouldn't be a victim. So what's interesting is that whatever non-traditional feelings of empathy you endure at this particular point, the point is, imagine then the horrors that so many others have had to put up with for so long when they are refused to acknowledge their humanity. Now, I take your point seriously.
So your group
let me finish. Let me finish, though. Let me finish.
To me.
Let me finish, sir.
That figures.
You're not my inquisitioner, okay? What I'm saying to you is that when you said you were upset that I added the element of race there, right? When I said mean, mad, white man. Well, what's interesting is that you may have felt that you were being ascribed a group identity to which you do not subscribe. You may have felt that you were being unfairly judged according to your particular race. You may have felt that your individual identity was being besmirched by my rather careless characterization of you, all of which qualifies for a legitimate response to me, but also the point we've been trying to make about the refusal to see our individual existence as women, as people of color, as First Nation people, and the like. My point simply has been, the reason I talked about race in that particular characterization, because there's a particular way in which I have come to a city. I don't know if there are a lot of black people out here, not sure, but I constantly come to places and spaces that are not my natural habitat, other than intellectual engagement and the love and the fury of rhetorical engagement, yes. But I often go into hostile spaces where people will not vote in favor for my particular viewpoint because I'm interested as an individual of breaking down barriers so that people can understand just how complicated it is. So what I'm saying to you is that I would invite you, in terms of the surrender of your privilege, to give you a specific response. Come with me to a Black Baptist church. Come with me to a historically black college. Come to me to an indigenous or First Nations community where we're able to engage in some of the lovely conversation, but also to listen and hear. And when I added race to that, I was talking about the historically evinced inability to acknowledge others' pains equally to the one that they are presently enduring. So, as a human being, I love you as my brother, but I stand by my comment.
Well, I've seen the sorts of things that you're talking about. I happen to be an honorary member of an indigenous family, so don't tell me about what I should go see with regards to oppression. You don't know anything about me.
You asked me a question, I gave you a response.
Yeah. You gave me a generic response,
It's
a generic race-based
response.
Interesting to hear talk about race and about gender and about equality, and it's something that I've thought about a lot and I can learn a great deal about, but that's not why I came to this debate. I was interested in what I've always been interested in, the suppression of language and thought, the closing down, the rationalist idea that seems beguiling, that if you limit people's language, it may somehow teach them a different way of thinking. Something that would have delighted the inventors of George Orwell's Newspeak, for example. And it seems to me it's just implausible. It doesn't work. And that's what I mean by empirical. It doesn't stand an empirical test. It isn't experientially validated, as we see from the political landscape now, and I worry that we may in the future. So I'm sort of disappointed that the subject has just revolved around academia, which was predictable, because that's the sort of crucible in which these elements are mixed. But even more disappointed that really I haven't heard from Michel or from Professor Dyson as to what they think political correctness is, because what they've talked about is basically saying progress, in our view, is progress. Well, I agree. That's, you know, yeah. So it is too, and good on progress. But how is it that you're saying that what we call political correctness, you call progress? That's what you're supposed to be arguing. I want to know what you mean by political correctness. There we are. Well, I'll hide behind the lecture in that case. Well, I've been fascinated by this conversation. There's been an enormous clash of cultures in the conversation. We've had, you know, classic, if I can call it, huckstering snake oil pulpit talk, which is... It's a mode of discourse, it's a rhetorical style that I find endlessly refreshing and vivifying, but I'm not sure that we actually focused on the point in question. And my objection has always been towards orthodoxies. I'm a heterodox and a contrarian, and I can't help myself. And I think there's been an underestimation of the fact that language does affect people. It does make the young in particular, as they're starting out on their educational or their work careers, it makes them very anxious, it makes them very angry, very upset, very alienated, to feel that they don't know anymore how to operate in the world, how to engage in relationships, how to think honestly. So they accrete more and more to their own mini groups. And I think that's dangerous and unhappy for society. I think it's reflected in a paucity of cinema and literature and art and the culture generally, is that there's a fear that's pervading it. And while people can talk to academia and say, you should come and see our lessons, our lectures are open and free and ideas are exchanged, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure it's true, but I don't think we should underestimate how much this feeling is prevalent in the culture of this strange paradox that the liberals are illiberal in their demand for liberality. They are exclusive in their demand for inclusivity. They are homogeneous in their demand for heterogeneity. They are somehow undiverse in their call for diversity. You can be diverse but not diverse in your opinions and in your language and in your behavior. And that's a terrible pity.
So I'm not here to claim that there's no such thing as oppression, unfairness, brutality, discrimination, unfair use of power, all of those. Anyone with any sense knows that hierarchical structures tilt towards tyranny, and that we have to be constantly wakeful to ensure that all they are isn't power and tyranny. It's interesting to hear Foucault referred to. It's unfortunate, but it's interesting. You know, because Foucault, like his French intellectual confreres, essentially believed that the only basis upon which hierarchies were established is power. And that's part of this pernicious politically correct doctrine that I've been speaking about. When a hierarchy becomes corrupt, then the only way to ascend it is to exercise power. That's essentially the definition of a tyranny. But that doesn't mean that the imperfect hierarchies that we have constructed in our relatively free countries, which at least tilt somewhat towards competence and ability, as evidenced by the staggering achievements of civilization that we've managed to produce, it doesn't mean that the appropriate way of diagnosing them is to assume without reservation unidimensionally that they're all about power, and as a consequence everyone who occupies any position within them is a tyrant or a tyrant in the making. And that is certainly the fundamental claim of someone like Foucault. And it's part and parcel of this, what would you call it, this ideological catastrophe that's political correctness. I'm not here to argue against progress. I'm not here to argue against equality of opportunity. Anyone with any sense understands that even if you're selfish, you're best served by allowing yourself access to the multiplicitous talents of everyone, and to discriminate against them for arbitrary reasons unrelated to their competences. It's abhorrent. That has nothing to do with the issue at hand. It isn't that good things haven't happened in the past and should continue to happen. That's not the point. The point is the point my compatriot Fry made, which is, well, we can agree on the catastrophe and we can agree on the historic inequity, but there's no way I'm going to agree that political correctness is the way to address any of that, and there's plenty of evidence to the contrary, some of which I would say was displayed quite clearly tonight.
So this entire video was actually beautiful to watch. I love how it went about. Eric Dowson right here was very disrespectful, and he's a racist. It's as simple as that. There's no best way to say who Eric Dowson is. He's a pure racist. And the way he came here, for me, he came here to attack Jordan Peterson. It feels like by him saying some certain statements, it's going to go viral. People will know about it. He will become the topic of the town. Because his aim right here was basically targeted at Jordan Peterson. Straight, it was targeted at Jordan Peterson. He said this entire conversation right here was just talking about racism. I know that racism has to do with political correctness. I understand that, but he was playing a victim game right here. Like, he was in a victim aspect. Like, he was playing a victim game, taking away 300 years away from their life. How do you expect them to become something great with the same level with the white man? Whereas in America currently, we are all the same. You understand? So he was playing a victim game right there. That's why Jordan Peterson asked him and said, who is the person you're actually talking about? Who is the person you're actually talking about? He started saying something different. Like, they have not taken away 300 years of your life. If not, you won't be in the same position with Jordan Peterson. You understand? So he says he's a very disrespectful man. Eric Dowson is a very disrespectful man. Like, you listen to him right here, got me pissed. And him insulting Jordan Peterson and telling him that he's a mad white man. Like, why would you use race in this? Why are you acting as a racist? Why are you playing the victim game in this entire conversation? You're not basically talking about political correctness. You're just talking about, you're just fighting Jordan Peterson. It's as simple as that. You're playing identity politics. That's exactly what he was doing, all talking about in this conversation. And the best person I would like right here was Stephen Fry. He was plain. He said his mind. He said why he doesn't support political correctness. He said everything in a very respectful and very mature conversation, like, very respectful manner. I do not know about Stephen Fry like that, but listen to him right here. Like, I tend to understand him. Like, there's a way you portray your opinion to people. People be like, okay, what you're saying makes sense. Okay, this is what we should work on. He said it in a very respectful manner, even if he's a gay. You understand? But he said it in a very respectful manner, in a very sensible way. He was one of the best speakers right here in this debate. Like, he was the best for me. I rate him over 10. He was the best. If I'm 10 over 10, like, that's the scale. He was the best. Followed by Jordan Peterson. Like, then Eric was mischievous. Then Michelle, she tried, but at the same time, she was actually colliding with Eric. Eric was very, very mischievous. He wanted everyone to laugh. He wanted everyone to... He saw this entire debate as a joke. He didn't take it serious. It feels like he's smart, but he's very stupid. Because him acting in this nonchalant behavior right here says a lot about him and his family, in his home. He's a very, very silly man. Frankly speaking, I'm very pissed by listening to this entire debate. Like, he was very disrespectful, extremely disrespectful, and also a bigot. He's a racist too. I know some people might be angry at me, but right now, like, listen to what he said to Jordan Peterson, I was pissed. It's a very demeaning word and very disrespectful word for a man you barely know anything about. You don't know about where Jordan Peterson is coming from. I'm not actually a maximum big fan of Jordan Peterson, but there are things that should be said right. You don't come here and disrespect him like, do you know who Jordan Peterson is? You don't, even if Stephen Fry, you can't disrespect Stephen Fry. You can't disrespect any person who is there, who is debating with you. You have the privilege of seeing him and you choose to disrespect him. Say he's number one on Twitter. You know he's trending. So you want to use you disrespecting him for you to be public, for you to trend to. It's a very disrespectful feedback from Eric. So my own feedback in political correctness, I don't believe it works. And also political correctness also make people to be afraid of what they say. They're trying to be very, very cautious. For me, some critics argue that political correctness is weaponized, used to shame or silence rather than to promote mutual respect. It can create gotcha moments where the focus is on calling people out rather than engaging in good faith discussion. And political correctness does not tackles the main root problem that we're having. That is the thing about this racism, LGBTQ people that are trying to talk about these things. The main issue we're having, political correctness does not tackle it. You understand? It's just gaslighted. Sometimes political correctness can actually divide people. But when people feel forced to speak in a certain way, they tend to be hiding themselves in a certain chamber. You don't allow people to voice their own opinion out. You understand? I don't believe it works. For certain people, I feel like political correctness is just a way to promote LGBTQ community. I'm not saying LGBTQ community are not free to do what they want to do, but at the same time, do not impose that on people. That you telling people that, oh, if you say this word, you make me feel some certain way. I don't care about your feelings. I have freedom of speech. So I don't care about your feelings. How you feel is your own business. You don't tell me how I should identify you. Do you understand? This is the issue we are having. You don't tell me how I should identify you. I see you as a male and also a female. If you are a male, I call you a male. If you are a female, I call you a female. You understand? You don't tell me that gender is social construct, that I should call you they, them. No, I choose to call you what I want to call you because it's how I'm seeing you, I call you as. You don't tell me I'm hurting your feelings. I don't care about your feelings. You don't know me that much. You understand? So I feel like political correctness basically does not work. It does not work. It brings division. It brings people to be too careful about what they want to voice their own certain opinion out. So this entire debate was beautiful to watch. At the same time, I totally dislike and disregard the respect that Eric and the manner of way he talked to Jordan Peterson. I dislike the way he talked to Jordan Peterson. Comment down below what you think about this video. Give us a thumbs up. Share this video to as many as you can, guys. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure you stay safe.